So we're in Edinburgh in Scotland in Greyfriars Kirkyard to look at something particularly dark, a dark facet of British history in the medical industry. Just before we begin, spin round for me if you wouldn't mind and take a moment to appreciate where we are, because this kirkyard is unlike anywhere else in the world. Scottish graveyards are very, very special. And as I say often, the greyness, the darkness of Britain is what makes us who and what we are, and therefore appreciate it for what it is. Now, another special facet of the kirkyard is this. And this is an example of what we call a mort safe or a mort cage. And to the untrained eye, especially if you're a ghosty type of person, you might believe this was to keep the dead in, but in fact it was to keep the living out. This was to prevent what we call resurrectionists during the 18th and 19th century from digging people up due to the medical industry, and this was across Britain. It's most famously known about in Edinburgh due to the Burke and Hare case during the 1800s, where they were killing people just to sell their bodies to the medical industry, to Dr. Knox, among other people. But Dr. Knox is the one that takes the brunt of the blame. Now, this certainly would have been all over the country, especially if you had a bit of wealth. Other examples where there was a lot of grave robbing that you can still see signs today might be Rotherhithe in London, and just opposite the church there by the Mayflower, you will see there was a watchtower built, and the watchman would keep his eye out for grave robbers in the night, and there would have been similar circumstances in graveyards such as this. Now, what makes Resurrectionists so special is it highlights to us the opportunism within crime, and it changes within each epoch. So it's quite clear that nowadays, I hope, not that we know of, you can't make money selling bodies to the industry, but because that was a possibility, people would do things that they wouldn't have otherwise done. This is what makes Burke and Hare so particularly unbearable, because would they have been murderers had they been able to make so much money out of it? They probably would have, they might have been criminals of some degree, but would they have been strangling people to death if there wasn't a pound note to be made out of it? And this is where we really need to look into the capitalistic details of the past and look at where our moral structure really came from. And it highlights to us how hard life really was. So come down here for me, please, because here's another example. And these two have been put back here so that we can see them as examples, because during the wars, a lot of these structures would be taken to be used for various means. You can see this one's quite faded. It's a very dark insight into a very dark past, because you can imagine what it must have been like. People sneaking in to dig up bodies which had recently passed away. The more recent the death, the more money you'd receive. So a lot of the cases would turn out to be students themselves who were actually sitting in the anatomy lectures, and they would be looking to seek favour from their professors and the doctors teaching them. And not just that, they had paid stupid amounts of money to come and study here. So you need the cadavers, the dead bodies, that's another name for them, cadavers, to keep the education process going. So there was this strange mix of scientific progression with a need for macabre crime. As dark as it is, would we have the medical advancements we have today without some of the disgusting crimes of the past? So this might answer within your mind as to why throughout your life, or you might have seen at some stage, graves that look suspiciously protected. They don't all look the same, like the mort safes. They take different shapes. They might have tall gates with spikes on top, just a basic gate with a padlock. And you might have always thought, well, what was that about? Was it some sort of spiritual thing so that the person's spirit could be protected? It wasn't. It was a very physical thing so that their body couldn't be literally snatched. So if you just turn around where you are right now, you'll see how much of this was evident within graveyards. Here you can see not only where the fence was, but here where the gate was to walk into this particular enclosure. All within here, these would have been part of what we call the mort safes or mort cages. Just before I show you another example, it would be criminal not to mention this, as the place is so absolutely awe-inspiring. This is actually the grave of John Adam, who was the architect of many great buildings in Edinburgh, but that's another story for another day. Just before I turn you around, here's another example. Look, you can see these bars sticking out would have been there to protect whoever was laid in. So the more you look, the more you'll find these examples. So obviously it's not, like I said, it's not just in Scotland or Greyfriars Kirkyard, it's all over Britain that you will see this. And Edinburgh was the leading location for medical advancements. It was. It became an intellectual superpower within Europe, and that's why there was so much money here. And the medical industry, like tourism for many countries, was more important to the authorities in a way, because it really generated necessary income, and they was very prepared to turn the odd blind eye. Until the case of Burke and Hare, where it was so embarrassing for them that they really had to change laws, it was the case that if you was of the upper echelon and you knew someone was up to something a bit sneaky, you'd much rather that no one noticed, because not only is it going to destroy a huge generation of wealth for Edinburgh, it's going to maybe uncover whatever you've been up to, because within the medical industry, they're all going to have secrets. Some will have done something they're not proud of, others will be directly involved in paying body snatchers. So once you open that can of worms, you just don't know what's going to come out of it. Here's some more examples. You can see the gates backed on to the actual graves here. And here you can see where they would have had the metal all the way round. One of the main arguments against Dr. Knox, being an anatomist, a leading scientist who was very revered and looked up to, was how could you not be suspicious that these bodies were so warm, and yet you was willing to buy them? And that was one of the huge arguments against him, because, you know, the average layman would stand there and say, hang on a minute, you know, that doesn't look like it died a few weeks ago, that looks like it died a few minutes ago. And the doctor would sort of say, yeah, okay, here's your cash, take him in, because he knew that was a prime specimen that he could, dare I say, milk for longer than had he taken in a body that's going to already be rotting. So the resurrectionists would be out here looking for whichever body was most fresh. So they'd be sitting in the pubs listening out for if someone's relative had died. And obviously if you're a visiting student, you're going to be a little less emotionally attached to digging people up from these graves. But if you're a local Scot, it's especially risky, because if the authorities don't do you, then locals will probably tear you limb from limb if they catch you and it's one of their family members. But the students would have been some of the people with that type of ability, because obviously it takes a certain mindset to be able to start digging up dead bodies, never mind manhandling them. So it was certainly suitable for the students who were learning to carve people up, to put it politely, to deal with dead bodies. They was going to have to do it in the future, and you know, they were the sort of people with the stomach to do so. Just thinking about it turns my stomach. Never mind taking cash off of someone who's supposed to be there to save us and protect us. Technically, what you're supposed to do is only use the bodies of people which had been condemned and you know, committed heinous crimes, or maybe were very sick. But those people weren't dying quick enough, it seems, especially for the huge trade that Edinburgh was projecting. And Edinburgh was finally, Scotland was finally taking over the rest of the world in something. So the last thing it wanted was to sacrifice that. So many people consider the wrought iron gates, the mort safes to be as a result of Burke and Hare, but it really wasn't. Burke and Hare were not resurrectionists. In fact, when they were captured, no one knew what they was up to, so they'd been murdering in private. The resurrectionists were working independently of Burke and Hare, and they are the reason that we have such structures as this. And always remember that the crime of our history is not just interesting, but a true representative of how hard we were living. And it shows that, like the Industrial Revolution and many epochs of our history, they certainly weren't as great as we have been told they are, and there was much room for improvement. And it would be nice if we could look back into these times, take the cultural and the wholesome facets of it, take them forward, without taking some of the bad parts with it. Anyway, thank you very much, and I'll see you soon. Take care.